Word of the Lord according to the Gospel of St. John, chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. It says, "On the third day there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. When the wine ran out, Jesus' mother said to him, 'They don't have any wine.' Jesus replied, 'Woman, what does that have to do with me? My time hasn't come yet.' His mother told the servants, 'Do whatever he tells you.' Nearby were 6 stone jars used for the Jewish cleaning ritual, each able to hold about 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, 'Fill the jars with water.' And they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, 'Now draw some from them and take it to the head waiter.' And they did. The head waiter tasted the water that had become wine. He didn't know where it had came from, though the servants knew who had drawn the water. The head waiter called to the groom and said, 'Everyone serves the good wine first. They bring out the second-rate wine only when the guests are drinking freely. You kept the good wine until now.' This was the first miraculous sign that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. He revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. You may be seated this morning. Well, I'm glad that we are together this morning. Like I said last Sunday, I get to the church parking lot, and I was just disappointed when I saw that the parking lot was reflecting back at me, and I knew in that moment we were probably in trouble. And again, I want to encourage you that if you did not receive that text message, to please contact Karen Dissett this week in the office. Karen, will you raise your hand? There she is. She is the boss. She is the head operator here. So if you would contact her and make sure that you want on that list so that we can communicate to you, because I don't think at this point Old Man Winter is done. So if you want to show up when you're supposed to show up and be alerted when we have to cancel, then please contact Karen. But I'm glad that we are able to meet today, and I'm glad that we were able to worship this morning. And I want to thank Josh and the praise team for leading us in worship. It sounds like you had a little bit of a snap there of one of the guitar strings, but you kept going, and thank you so much there for your leadership and your ability to just maintain and keep going. I was joking with Marcella Qualls as we were coming in this morning, and I was even shared with some of the Sunday school classes that if it's okay with you, and you need to check with your employers and everything, but I think starting next Sunday, I think it's appropriate for all of us to go down to Florida to worship for the remaining few months. And we'll come back in the spring. And is everybody okay with that by a raise of hands? All right. Some of you didn't raise your hands. I love that you love the seasons, but at this point, I'm done. I am ready. I am ready for spring. I'm ready for baseball, and I'm ready for the sunshine. Mainly because I want my boys out of my house. When they get this age, and there's 3 of them, and you fill them with sugar, which that's on me. Sometimes it's a challenge. But I love our text this morning. Not because Jesus turned water into wine, although, hey, whatever. Because this is the first miracle, right? Recorded. This is the first miraculous sign that Jesus performed while on this earth. It got me thinking about one of my favorite Christmas presents when I was a child. My mom, instead of wrapping the gift and placing it underneath the tree, she handed me a slip of paper, and on that slip of paper was a clue that I had to decipher, which, as you know, led to another clue in the house. Then it took me to someplace else within the house until finally I received the final clue, and she told me on the clue to head to the dryer. Now, it said something besides head to the dryer. I had to decipher the clue and where it was located. And I'm sure at that point, as a young child, she had to help me because I really honestly didn't know how my clothes got dry. And so I think she eventually helped me get to the dryer. And I go to our family's dryer in the den, and I open up the door, and there was a brand new Nintendo Entertainment System. Yes. Now thank you. Yeah, I was really excited about that. That was one of my favorite Christmases, as I got to spend the rest of the day playing Mario Brothers. And if you've never done that, you are missing out on life. Please, you need to put that on your bucket list to do at some point in time. You will thank me later for it. And so that was one of my favorite, Christmas presents. And it's one that I remember because it was a treasure hunt, and it was fantastic. Well, I say all that this morning because John, in the 11th verse of our text, he tells us that this was the first miraculous sign that Jesus performed. What John is saying to us, and what he will say throughout his gospel, is that there is something about this Jesus. He can change your life if you will allow him. And he begins to lead us on this treasure hunt, so to speak, throughout his gospel. Well, our text begins by telling us that on the third day, there was this wedding that took place in Cana. Now, there's only a few references to Cana in the New Testament, which probably tells us a little bit about its importance or the lack thereof. But we do know that Mary and Jesus and the disciples, they were on the guest list for this wedding. And in fact, back then, almost the entire village would have been included on the guest list for the wedding. It wasn't uncommon at that time for a betrothal period to occur. And so when the bride and the groom finally decided, and by the way, betrothal period is kind of like an engagement today, except back then it would have been a little bit more serious. And the consequences, even if you would have broke that betrothal, could have been almost like a divorce today. But that's a whole nother sermon for another day. But there would have been this period where at the end, and it would have worked out and everything was fine and it met all the obligations, whatever. If the bride would have been a virgin, the wedding would have taken place on a Wednesday. If the bride was a widow, it would have taken place on a Thursday. Why? I don't know. Ask somebody smarter than I. But I do know that even today, we still have these things after the wedding called like a celebration or a feast. It's our favorite part, if I could be honest. As a minister who does weddings, I really look forward to the end because my job is done and I just get to go and have fun and celebrate with the young couple, and it's fantastic. But back then, a celebration could have lasted up to a week. So parents of the bride, imagine paying that bill. A feast for a week. How many of y'all are in? Yeah, those of you who don't have to pay, you're in. Yes, I'm in. Let's do it. Well, at some point in the celebration, a travesty occurs. They run out of wine. Now, you have to understand that back then, that would have been a big deal. That could have been seen as a disgraceful act for somebody to run out of wine, that you didn't meet the expectations, and you could have been known as the family or as the couple that didn't provide enough. And you could have been, again, embarrassed socially for as long as people will remember. And the last time I checked, sometimes we as people remember the wrong things for the wrong reasons for far too long. That could have been one of them. And so Mary sees this moment and understands the implications for that bride and groom and their family, and she runs up to Jesus and she says, listen, we've got a problem here. There's no more wine. Jesus, right, he says to Mary, which, by the way, in John's gospel, it's never Mary. Her name is never mentioned by her actual name. It's always the mother of Jesus. But in this moment, and I would like to think that if that were to occur today, you may want to stand within, arm's length distance from your mother, right? Because I don't think today, if you were to respond by saying "woman" to your mom, you may want to do that with like a 10-foot pole, right? Now, that is somewhat of a shock for us because, again, most people don't say woman to their mother and live to tell about it. But back then, that was a sign of respect. And so Jesus isn't disrespecting his mother, he's respecting his mother, but he's saying to his mother, listen, that's not my problem, right? But then he goes on to say something else. My time hasn't come yet. Now, what is actually happening here is something, for at least us pastors, rather exciting, because what Jesus is saying is that the time for his private and public ministry is now changing. And so the allegiance of Jesus is changing in that he is saying, listen, the will of me is being shaped by the Father. And so whatever the Father asks of me, I will do. Mary, I don't know if she didn't hear it or if she did hear it and just said, I'm your mother, you will do what I tell you. I don't know. John doesn't tell us that, but what we do know is that Mary turns around to the servants and says, do whatever he tells you. Now, what happens from that moment on, and we know this, right? Jesus turned the water into wine. There were a series of 6 stone jars that would have been 20 to 30 gallons. Now, you can imagine how impressive and how heavy those stone jars would have been had they been filled up to the brim. Right? They would have been used for the Jewish ritual of cleansing. And so whenever you had a guest come into your home, you would have, spooned some out, you would have washed their hands, because even back then, as it is today, it's important to wash your hands before you eat. Right? Okay, I'm hoping more of y'all agree with me on that, or I am not shaking your hands after we leave service. Every Sunday night in our life group, we usually start, and tradition is that kids go downstairs and they hang out there for about 10 minutes as we parents, we get everything ready for the life group, and then we tell them, we ring the dinner bell, right? And you could hear they're coming up the stairs as fast as they can, and they stop. And even though we've been meeting now for, roughly almost 4 years, we still have to remind them every week, wash your hands. Kids are disgusting. And they need to wash their hands. And so it's important, even then, as it is today, to wash your hands. And so that's what these stone jars would have been used for, is for cleansing and making sure that people were clean to eat. Jesus somehow turns the water into wine, and the head waiter, he's not aware of it, but he takes some of it and he says that this is the greatest stuff since sliced bread or whatever back then. And he's just amazed, and he says, listen, most people at that point, they serve the good stuff first, but because you are so incredible and gracious and generous, you have saved the best for last, when we probably at that point couldn't even tell the difference. That's how impressive you are. And then the text just ends by saying this was the first miraculous sign that Jesus performed in Cana of Galilee. Now, I got to be honest. For most Protestant pastors, we at times cringe when we approach this text, because I guess part of me wants to ask, really? That's the first miracle? Of all the first that you could have done, you chose that? Did you not know you weren't going to help us out later on in life? But that's okay, Jesus. Do whatever you want. But, and so what really, by the way, what's really fun about this is that throughout church history, the ways that pastors and theologians have tried to communicate this first miracle, some have said that what really happened was that Jesus didn't actually turn the water into wine, because, at that point, John clearly tells us they've probably had way too much, and so I don't even know if they would have known the difference. And so maybe as a joke, that head waiter realized that it was actually still water, but instead of shaming the bride and the groom, he says, this is the best wine ever. Now, I got to be honest, I don't think that stands up to the weight of historical criticism. Because the text tells us in verse 9 that Jesus turned the water into wine. And Chris Tomlin said it. And so if Chris Tomlin said it, then you know it has to be true. Well, the other way that theologians and pastors have interpreted this text is to say that what John is actually using is an old heathen legend to proclaim a Christian truth in that moment. But again, I got to be honest, that doesn't withstand the weight of interpretation of this text either, because the last time I checked, and I could be wrong, but I'm not on this, turning water into water is not a miracle. And so, as uncomfortable as some people may be, I choose to believe that what Jesus actually did was turn the water into wine, because that is a miracle. And apparently, according to at least the head waiter and those who would have partaken of it at that point, it would have been the best wine ever. Now, I don't know anything about wine, but apparently it was really good stuff. And we just have to take John at his word here. But when we get past the uncomfortableness of what Jesus did for many of us, what the miracle does communicate is this. There is this transforming power associated with Jesus. Let me repeat that one more time because it's going to be the most important thing I'm going to say to you today. There is transforming power associated with Jesus. Now, imagine, let's play this out for a second. If Jesus can turn water into wine, imagine what Jesus can do in your life. Imagine what Jesus can do in your marriage. Imagine what Jesus can do to your hurts and your disappointments. You see, one thing I love about Wesleyan holiness theology is that we are radically optimistic about grace. And I am radically optimistic that in this moment, this day, if you choose to believe it, God, through the power of Christ and the Holy Spirit, can change your life and your circumstances today. And if you believe that, please say amen. But the question still boils down to an issue of discipleship. I am fully on board by saying this is a miracle. Jesus turned water into wine. But I still think at the end of the day, there is a choice for us to make. Because Mary, after she had that moment with Jesus, and she tells him, we've got a problem on our hands here. And even though Jesus said, my time hasn't come yet, mother, Mary, mama, I don't know, whatever you want to say, woman, Mary does something else. She turns around to those servants and she says, do whatever he tells you. You see, here's the thing, and here's why this text matters to us today. I believe that Jesus can transform a life, transform a marriage, transform a relationship, transform, you name it. You put a blank there. I believe Jesus can do that. But here's the bottom line. I ultimately believe that it's on you. Because you ultimately have to do whatever it is he tells you to do. If you want to see your marriage restored, it's a good idea to do whatever Jesus tells you to do. And you substitute that for whatever it is today. We believe that there is this transforming power associated with Jesus. But ultimately, it is the result of our obedience to him. Do whatever it is he's telling you right now to do. I want to invite you to stand with me this morning. All heads bowed, all eyes closed. I'm not going to have you come forward this morning, but I want to ask you some questions. You see, I do believe with every fiber of my being that there is something about Jesus, that he can transform your life, that he can transform your marriage, that he can turn your disappointments and your hurts and he can transform them if you will allow him. But it ultimately boils down to a choice that we each have to make. Are we willing to do whatever it is that He's asking us to do? You know, we are wrapping up the month of January. And as somebody who traditionally goes to the gym 12 months out of the year, I look forward to the end of January because that means people aren't taking up my gym space. All those who have quit their New Year's resolutions, and as an introvert, I'm really excited about that. But you and I both know that if we want to transform our bodies and our health, it doesn't happen magically. It doesn't just happen by signing up and paying for a month of membership. That's step one, but step two means you actually have to be present in the gym using the equipment. If you want to see transformation of your body, it's going to be because you eat right and you exercise and you get enough sleep. Well, I'm here to tell you this morning that if you believe that Jesus can transform your life or whatever the situation is, it is going to be because you do whatever it is He's asking you to do this morning. Maybe it's giving up an idol because something else is Lord of your life besides Him. Maybe it's admitting that you're sorry and that you messed up to your spouse and that you were wrong and seeking forgiveness. Call me crazy, call me optimistic, but I believe right now in this moment Jesus is speaking to many of you. And so with all heads bowed and eyes closed, I want to ask you some questions. Is Jesus asking you to do something this morning? If so, all you need to do is just shake your head yes. And if He is, and thank you for shaking your heads, I want to encourage you to obey. Because you think turning water into wine is a miracle, wait until you see what He begins to do in your life today. It is something far grander than you could ever begin to imagine or know. Jesus can transform your life. And He'll turn it into something beautiful. But He'll do it because you allowed Him to. Give it to Him. Let go. And allow the Spirit to work through you today and this upcoming week. Dear Heavenly Father,